Obese girl was given only scraps at the town feast. Then the mountain man stood up and said, "Serve her plate like mine." The autumn of 1810 painted the Ohio River Valley in shades of amber and crimson. The settlement of Harrow's Creek, a modest collection of log cabins and weathered storefronts clinging to the riverbank, prepared for its annual harvest feast with unusual fervor. This year the corn had grown tall, the tobacco hadn't rotted, and 3 trading vessels had made port without incident, reasons enough for celebration in a place where survival itself was victory. Helena Whitmore stood in the cookhouse behind the town square, her apron stained with grease and berry juice, her face flushed from hours beside the fire. At 32, she carried her weight like an apology, shoulders perpetually hunched as if trying to occupy less space in a world that had made clear she occupied too much. Her hands, though, moved with confidence through dough and batter, over bubbling pots and roasting meat. Those hands had created everything the townspeople would consume tonight: 3 roasted pigs, 24 loaves of cornbread, apple pies with lattice crusts, venison stew thick with vegetables, candied yams, pickled beets, and butter biscuits that melted on the tongue. "Helena, the Reverend wants more butter for his table," called Sarah Pritchard, the merchant's wife, poking her head through the doorway without entering. She wrinkled her nose slightly, though whether at the heat or at Helena herself was unclear. "And do make sure the serving girls present the pies properly. Appearance matters, you understand." Helena understood perfectly. Appearance had mattered her entire life, had mattered when her father, a failed shopkeeper, had died and left her to the charity of distant cousins, had mattered when those cousins made clear that a girl of her size would never find a husband and should be grateful for kitchen work, had mattered every day since she'd arrived in Harrow's Creek 5 years ago, welcomed for her cooking skills, but never quite welcomed into the community itself. "Yes, Mrs. Pritchard," Helena murmured, wiping her hands on her apron. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the town square transformed into something from a fairy tale. Long tables stretched beneath strings of lanterns, their surfaces laden with pewter plates and earthenware bowls. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air, and families arrived in their finest, which in frontier Ohio meant cleanest, clothing. Children darted between adults, their laughter cutting through the evening cool. Helena watched from the cookhouse doorway as the seating commenced. There was a precise hierarchy to these arrangements, understood by all and enforced by tradition. At the head table sat Reverend Michaels, Mayor Thornton, and the 3 wealthiest merchants. The second tier included prosperous farmers, the schoolteacher, and the doctor who visited monthly. Then came the rivermen, the trappers, the families of modest means. Women sat beside their husbands, children clustered at separate tables under watchful eyes. "Helena?" Mary Clemens, a girl of 16 who sometimes helped in the kitchen, appeared at her elbow. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mrs. Thornton says, she says your portion is here, in the kitchen. She says it wouldn't be appropriate for you to sit at the tables, on account of—" The girl couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Helena had heard every variation of the excuse over the years. Takes up too much room, might make others uncomfortable. Really, more of a servant than a guest, isn't she? The polite fiction was that kitchen workers ate separately to stay near their duties. The truth sat heavier. "I understand," Helena said, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you for telling me, Mary." After the girls scurried away, Helena turned to the small table in the corner where a single plate waited. She lifted the cover and felt something crack inside her chest. Bones stripped nearly clean, charred bread ends, a scoop of congealed stew from the pot's bottom, the scraps, the failures, the things not good enough for guests. She had cooked for hours, had created a feast from raw ingredients and fire and skill, and this was her portion. Behind her, 2 of the younger serving women giggled. "At least you got to taste test while cooking," one said brightly. "Probably already full anyway, right?" Helena's hands trembled. She set the cover back down without touching the food. Outside, the feast had begun. Plates piled high made their rounds. Laughter and conversation rose like steam. And in the midst of it all, at the end of the 3rd table where the river folk sat, a man watched everything with eyes the color of winter ice. Logan Thorne was a mountain man in the truest sense. He lived in the high country 3 weeks' travel west, emerging twice yearly to trade pelts and dried fish for salt, gunpowder, and news of the wider world. He was tall and lean, weathered by wind and sun, with a beard that nearly hid the scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Most people found him unsettling, too quiet, too watchful. He spoke little and stayed less, conducting his business and disappearing back into the wilderness before anyone could grow comfortable with his presence. Tonight, he had contributed 2 beaver pelts and a string of dried venison to the feast's provisions, a generous offering by his standards. He sat eating mechanically, but his attention kept drifting. He counted place settings, noted the careful arrangement of guests, observed who served and who was served, and he noticed the absence. "Excuse me," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chatter around him. Conversations faltered. Logan rarely spoke at social gatherings. "This feast, who are we thanking?" Mayor Thornton, pleased to explain, rose slightly. "Why, we thank the Almighty for his bounty, Mr. Thorne. We thank the land and the river for their gifts. We thank every hard-working soul who contributed to this harvest." "I see." Logan's gaze swept the tables again. "And who cooked this meal?" "That would be Helena Whitmore," the mayor said, a slight edge entering his voice. Where was this going? "Excellent cook, absolutely excellent. We're fortunate to have her." "Where is she sitting?" The silence that fell was profound. Several women exchanged glances. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat. Sarah Pritchard spoke up, her voice carrying that tone of patient explanation used with children and simpletons. "The kitchen staff eat separately, Mr. Thorne. They need to remain available should anything—" "So the person who cooked this entire feast is not considered a guest at it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. People shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Thornton laughed lightly, nervously. "Well, it's a matter of propriety, you understand. There are considerations of space, of—" Logan stood. His chair scraped loudly against the wooden platform. Every eye followed him as he picked up his plate, heaped with pork, cornbread, 2 types of pie, and vegetables in butter sauce, and held it aloft. "If the woman who created this meal isn't treated as an honored guest," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square, "then I'm not a guest either. I'm just another transaction." He stepped away from the table and walked toward the cookhouse with long, deliberate strides. Behind him, chaos erupted. People talking over each other, Mayor Thornton calling for order, children asking what was happening. Logan heard none of it. He pushed through the cookhouse door and found Helena standing frozen by her table of scraps, one hand still touching the plate cover. She looked up, startled, ashamed to be seen in this moment. Logan looked at her untouched plate, at his full one, and something in his jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he said, setting his plate on the table before her, "I believe there's been a mistake. This is meant for you." Helena stared at the food, then at him, tears suddenly burning her eyes. You don't have to—" "I know." He pulled over a second chair, sat down across from her. Then he raised his voice, speaking to the serving women who had frozen in the corners. "Bring another plate like this one for me, and one for the lady, from the good portions, not the scraps." No one moved. Logan's expression didn't change, but his next words carried the weight of finality. "The pelts I brought tonight are worth 3 months' wages. I'll take them back right now if this isn't handled properly. And next year, when winter bites, don't send messengers asking for trade." That broke the paralysis. Mary Clemens rushed to fill 2 plates with proper portions. The older cook, Mrs. Henderson, who had been washing dishes with deliberate loudness, stopped and turned to watch. Outside, the argument had grown heated. Several people had come to the cookhouse door to see what was happening. Mayor Thornton's voice carried over the rest. "This is absurd. The woman understands her place." "Her place?" Logan didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made the mayor stop mid-sentence. "She created everything you're eating, every bite, and you gave her bones and burnt bread. What does that say about your place?" Edmund Holloway, one of the rivermen, had been quiet until now. He was an older man, weathered and honest, whose wife had died the previous winter. He stood slowly. "Mountain Man's right," he said. "Ain't Christian to do that to anybody, let alone someone who worked all day for us." "Stay out of this, Edmund," Mrs. Pritchard snapped. "Won't." Edmund picked up his plate. "If Helena's eating in the kitchen, reckon that's where I should be too." He walked past the shocked gentry and into the cookhouse, taking a seat at Helena's small table with a decisive thump. "Evening, Helena. Logan, fine meal you've made here." The dam broke. Margaret Holloway, Edmund's daughter, stood with her plate. Then James Cutter, a young trapper. Then Alice Morrison, whose family lived in a cabin barely larger than a shed. One by one, a stream of the settlement's poorer residents, the ones who understood what it meant to be invisible, to serve and never be honored, carried their plates into the cookhouse. The room filled with people, pressed shoulder to shoulder, some sitting on flour sacks and overturned buckets. The laughter that arose was different from the polite chatter outside, louder, more genuine, edged with the defiance of the excluded suddenly finding community. Helena sat at the center of it, plate untouched, tears streaming down her face. Logan, still across from her, pushed the plate closer. "Should eat," he said quietly. "Food's getting cold." Outside, Mayor Thornton and Reverend Michaels held a frantic consultation. The optics were disastrous. The town's elite dining alone while the common folk crowded into the kitchen with the mountain man and the fat cook. Worse, Logan Thorne was not a man to cross lightly. He controlled access to trade routes others feared to travel. His word carried weight with the trappers and river tribes, and he had just publicly called out their cruelty. "We must remedy this," the Reverend said urgently. "Bring proper portions to the kitchen. Make it seem we always intended for her to eat well." "That's ridiculous," Mrs. Thornton hissed. "Everyone will know." "Everyone already knows," the mayor's voice cracked slightly. "They know we've been shown up by a wilderness hermit with more decency than we've displayed. Bring the food, now, and tomorrow we discuss new arrangements for the cook." So it was that platters of the finest food were carried into the crowded cookhouse, the mayor himself overseeing the operation with a fixed smile that looked more like rigor mortis. "A misunderstanding," he announced to the packed room. "Of course Helena is an honored guest. Why, she's the star of the evening. We were merely ensuring she had a quieter space." No one believed him, but they accepted the food. Helena finally began to eat, each bite tasting of something more than sustenance, tasting of dignity, of being seen, of mattering. Logan ate beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally meeting her eyes with a small nod that seemed to say, "You're worthy of this, always have been." The feast in the cookhouse lasted long into the night. Somewhere around the third round of pie, Edmund Holloway struck up a fiddle tune, and people pushed back from tables to dance in the tiny space. Helena found herself pulled to her feet by Alice Morrison, spinning in the lamplight, laughing for the first time she could remember in years. Logan watched from his seat, something almost like a smile touching his scarred face. When the evening finally wound down and people began drifting home, Logan stood to leave. Helena followed him to the door. "Mr. Thorne," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you." He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, seeing past the size and the shame to the person beneath. "Don't need thanks," he said. "Just needed doing." "Will you," she hesitated, "will you be in town long?" "Few days, trading to finish." "Would you let me cook you a proper meal, just as thanks? A private thanks?" Something shifted in his expression. "I'd like that, ma'am. I'd like that just fine." 3 days later, Logan appeared at the small cabin behind the cookhouse where Helena lived, a modest space, but hers own. She'd spent the afternoon cooking, not from obligation but from joy, preparing dishes she loved but rarely made: rabbit and cream sauce, biscuits with honey butter, greens with bacon, and a blackberry cobbler that perfumed the entire cabin. They ate at her small table as evening light filtered through the single window. At first, conversation came haltingly, two people unused to companionship finding their way, but gradually, words began to flow. Logan told her about the mountains, about winters when the snow fell so deep he couldn't see his own cabin from 20 paces away, about summers when the meadows burst with flowers, like stars fallen to earth, about the silence that wasn't empty but full of wind and water and the calls of things unseen. Helena told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about loving to cook even as a child, stealing into the kitchen to watch the servants work, about losing everything when her father died, about the cousins who took her in but never let her forget she was Charity, about coming west with the vague hope that distance might mean freedom. "Does it?" Logan asked. "Mean freedom?" "Sometimes," she said honestly. "Out here there's less concern with social graces, but there's still judgment, still hierarchy, just simpler, maybe." Simpler's not always better. He was quiet a moment. You know why I came to the mountains? She shook her head. I had a wife once, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma. This was back in Pennsylvania, before the turn of the century. I was a carpenter, had a little shop. We weren't rich, but we were— He paused, searching for the word. Content. Then cholera came through, took them both in 3 days. Logan, I'm so sorry. People told me it was God's will, that I'd understand someday, that I should be grateful for the time I had. His hands tightened on his cup. I didn't want to understand. Didn't want to be grateful. I wanted them back. When I couldn't have that, I wanted to be somewhere people couldn't tell me how to grieve. So you went to the mountains. So I went to the mountains. Been 15 years now. It's a good life mostly. Quiet, clean. But sometimes, he met her eyes. Sometimes you realize you've been alone so long you've forgotten what it's like to be seen, really seen, not just looked at. Helena understood completely. They sat in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of two people who had said the important things. As Logan rose to leave, he paused at the door. I'll be heading back west in 2 days, but I'll be down again come spring, trade season. I'll be here, Helena said. Will you cook for me again, if I come? Anytime you want. He nodded, settled his hat, and disappeared into the night. Helena closed the door and leaned against it, pressing her palm to her chest where her heart seemed to beat differently than before. Spring came, and Logan with it. He appeared at her door with fresh venison and wild turkey, and she cooked them meals that became the talk of the settlement, not because anyone was invited, but because the smoke from her chimney carried scents that made mouths water. They ate, they talked, they sat in companionable silence on her small porch and watched the river flow past. Summer arrived and Logan stayed longer than usual. Trade's slower this year, he claimed, but everyone noticed he spent more time at Helena's cabin than at the trading post. They took walks along the riverbank at dusk. She showed him her small garden, herbs and vegetables she tended with the same care she brought to cooking. He taught her to identify animal tracks, to read weather in the clouds. The town watched and gossiped. Some found it sweet, others thought it absurd, the mountain man and the fat cook playing at courtship like love-struck children. But Helena, for the first time in her life, didn't care what they thought. Logan saw her as she was and found her worthy. That was enough. One evening in late July, as they sat on her porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Logan spoke. I've been thinking. Dangerous activity, Helena teased. He smiled. He smiled more now, she'd noticed. Come autumn, when I head back to the mountains, come with me. Helena's breath caught. Logan, I know it's sudden. I know the mountains are harsh, but Helena, I've been half alive for 15 years, and these past months with you, I feel whole again. The cabin's small but sturdy. There's a creek nearby, good hunting. I could build a better kitchen, a real kitchen. And come spring, we could come back down together, trade, see people. But winters we'd be alone together. Alone with you sounds better than surrounded by people who tolerate me, Helena said slowly. But Logan, I need to know, are you asking me because you care for me, or because you need a cook? He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. I'm asking because when I'm in the mountains now, all I think about is you. Because you make me laugh. Because you see the world in ways that surprise me. Because you're brave and kind and brilliant, and you deserve someone who sees that. The cooking's just a happy benefit. Helena felt tears on her cheeks. I've never been proposed to before. Didn't think I ever would be. Is that a yes? That's a yes, absolutely yes. They married in August, a simple ceremony with Reverend Michaels officiating. The whole town attended, some out of genuine happiness, others out of curiosity, and a few because they couldn't quite believe it was real. Helena wore a dress of pale blue linen that she'd sewn herself, letting out seams without shame. Logan wore clean buckskins and a new shirt, his beard trimmed. After the ceremony there was, naturally, a feast. This time, Helena cooked as a gift rather than an obligation, and she and Logan sat at the head table, honored guests at their own celebration. Edmund Holloway made a toast, to seeing people as they are, not as we expect them to be. The room erupted in cheers. As summer faded into autumn, Helena and Logan prepared for their journey west. She packed her essential tools, a good iron pot, her best knife, dried herbs, precious salt. He arranged for 2 sturdy mules to carry supplies. The townspeople contributed generously: blankets, preserved foods, even a small Dutch oven from the mayor himself. "You'll come back in spring?" Mary Clemens asked, tearful at Helena's departure. "Every spring," Helena promised, "and you can visit us if you're brave enough for the journey." The day they left, half the town gathered to see them off. As they reached the edge of the settlement, Helena turned back one last time, looking at the cookhouse where her life had changed, where a man had stood up and said she mattered. Then she turned forward, toward the mountains rising blue and distant, toward her new life. The cabin was exactly as Logan had described, small but solid, nestled in a valley where the mountains cupped the sky. Helena stood in the doorway that first day and felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not because of the building, but because Logan was there, because she had chosen it, because no one here would judge her worth by her appearance. That first winter was hard but wonderful. Snow fell deep and stayed for months. Helena learned to read the signs of changing weather, to preserve meat in the cold, to make bread without a proper oven. Logan taught her to snowshoe, to split wood, to shoot. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from the few books they'd brought, playing cards, simply being together. In the spring, they traveled back to Harrow's Creek with pelts and wild honey, and Helena cooked at the harvest feast again, but this time as an honored guest who chose to share her gift. Young Mary Clemens had become the regular cook, and Helena spent hours teaching her techniques, sharing recipes. "You look different," Alice Morrison said, studying Helena's face. "Happy." "I am," Helena said simply. Years passed in this rhythm, winters in the mountains, springs and summers traveling and trading, autumns in Harrow's Creek. Helena's cooking became legendary across the frontier. People traveled days to taste her meals when she was in town. But she always returned to the mountains, to Logan, to the life they'd built. They never had children. Whether by choice or chance, Helena never said. But their cabin became a waypoint for travelers, a place of refuge and remarkable food. Trappers spread word. If you found yourself in the high country near Whispering Creek, look for Logan Thorne's cabin. His wife would feed you like a king and ask nothing but stories in return. In the summer of 1825, 15 years after that first feast, Helena and Logan sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains golden crimson. Helena's hair had gone gray, Logan's beard was white. But they sat close, her hand in his, still finding comfort in silence and each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Logan asked. "Leaving town? Coming out here?" Helena thought about the girl she'd been, ashamed, invisible, living on scraps of respect and scraps of food. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, skilled, loved, and loving. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me more than a full plate that night. You gave me the understanding that I deserved one. You always deserved one. I know that now." She squeezed his hand. "Took me a long time to believe it, but I know it now." They sat in silence as the sky darkened and stars emerged one by one, like lanterns lighting the path they'd walked together. Somewhere in the valley below, smoke rose from their chimney, carrying the scent of baking bread, a smell that promised nourishment, warmth, and welcome, a smell that promised home. And in the mountains of the frontier, in a cabin built by hand and filled with love, 2 people who had been invisible to the world found each other and built a life that needed no audience, no approval, no permission but their own. The feast that had changed everything was long past, but its lesson endured. Every person deserves a seat at the table, a plate piled high, and the simple dignity of being seen as they truly are, worthy, valuable, and whole.